Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, where we explore the artistry and craft behind storytelling across different medium. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back Joshua Rubin, an interactive Emmy-winning narrative director and a writer with 2 decades of experience in film, television, video games, and XR. Joshua's illustrious career includes co-writing Assassin's Creed 2, helping create the world of Destiny, and leading narrative efforts on Outriders. His latest adventure, however, is launching Strangeland Comics, an indie studio for high-concept, brain-candy sci-fi stuff. Today, we're going to dig into the language of writing. So Joshua, thanks for joining me.
Hi.
Hi.
That's like my video voice. I found myself when I shoot videos now, like I'm always like, hi, I'm Joshua Rubin. I don't know why that comes out. I'm just a ham. I've been a ham since I was a kindergartner.
You got to have a big personality to do what you do, Joshua.
In kindergarten, I'm just remembering, I don't know why you sent me down this path. I was cast in Snow White, and I played Grumpy and the narrator. And that double billing made me feel like a star. And I remember what a big ham I was as the narrator, and I think I've just always been that kid.
You are a star.
So are you, my friend.
All right, well, we are here today to talk about this wonderful thing that we call the language of writing. The languages of writing.
Language of writing, yeah. It's a phrase I've been using.
It is. You used it in a previous conversation, and it kind of piqued my interest. So before we dig in, though, I do like to start with a little bit of history. You've been on the show before. People can go back and listen to the previous one if they want the big history. But why don't you just kind of bring everybody up to speed with who is Joshua Rubin? What are the highlights? And especially what you're up to now. Let's hit that really quick. Don't dig too deep. We'll do that later. But who are you? What are you up to?
Well, I've been told recently I should introduce myself. I should lead with my awards. So let's try this. I am a interactive Emmy-winning, Frodo VR award-winning, BAFTA WGA-nominated writer of video games, TV, failed film writer, VR, and now comics.
And that is my spiel. Is that too award heavy, or is that impressive? That's impressive, but I love how you throw in the failed screenwriter, like just a little bit of humbleness there at the end.
It's a bit of balance, yeah.
There you go.
Exactly, you need that.
Well, let's be honest. You have made some really incredible shit, so you have every right to be like, "Hey, here's what I've done," and that's cool. I love it. What are you passionate about these days, Len? Let's go that way. Forget the history. What is floating your boat right now?
The thing I'm most excited about is starting a comic book studio, an indie label called Strangeland Comics that is focused on high concept, brain candy, mind bending sci-fi, the kind that you love. I've got my first book in production right now. It is my first time writing a comic book after 30 years in various forms of the industry of writing. And I have been going through the experience of learning a new language of writing. And it's incredible because I've learned so many different languages of writing for every medium that I've worked in. And to get to do it again at age 50 is thrilling. Learning how to launch a company is thrilling. I'm talking to so many people, learning so much about comic book art, about the business of publishing, about the business of comic books. And having done this before in different industries, it's always a roller coaster where you start at the bottom going up, and it's so much work and there's so much to learn and it's all so new and overwhelming. And then you get to the top and you're like, oh my God, now I can see so far and the view is incredible. And now I'm hoping at some point soon to go over the edge and just start writing it. Right now, I'm still going up, nearing the top and seeing a little bit more with every day.
What made you, what instigated this? What was what pushed you into comics, back into comics in this direction?
Well, I mean, back into comics only in that I've always read comics. They've been a mainstay of my life. I've always loved them. Started when my Aunt Rhoda gave me a Hulk comic randomly when I was about 8 years old. And I said, "What's this?" And then I went to the drugstore sometime later where she said she had gotten it and found a whole rack full of comics and just bought a handful of them and was kind of amazed, mostly amazed at the idea that these were fragments of stories that started in media res, where I had no idea who these characters were, what they were doing, but clearly they were part of a mythology that had been going on and on and on. And I had to do this kind of active reading to begin to piece together the clues like we do at a great movie that starts in media res, right in the middle of the action. And you could then, there would be notes from the editors, like as Stan Lee would write in the corner, asterisks, as in Fantastic Four, number 347. And I'd be like, oh my God, I have to get Fantastic Four, number 347. And then I started digging through comic book stores to find back issues to kind of piece together. There was no internet, no wiki to learn the story. There was no true source of information. It was just the comics, then these physical objects you had to find and collect. And then I went deeper into the stores and found heavy metal at the back with naked ladies and robots and weird noir and just bizarre fantasy worlds and Mobius's art and Corbin with Den, which was so sexy and so Dune-esque and mind-blowing and just discovered the art of comic storytelling. And then in high school, I had one of those great nerd friends who I think at the time, like no one else talked to him, but I found him just so fascinating. And he started bringing me floppies of Watchmen as it came out and said, "You have to read this," and sent it home with me, floppies of Akira as it was coming out. And so I had this like incredible access through this wonderful guy to the most amazing comic art that was happening in the 80s. And then I didn't really read comics, and maybe I'm going too deep here, but
No, that's perfect.
I had a kind of after many years away from comics, going through college and becoming a screenwriter and ending up in Hollywood. So this is like probably a 10-year period that I didn't read comics. And then there was a moment where I got to Hollywood and I was having enough early success without getting anything made, but enough early success that I was meeting tons and tons of producers and agents. And they all asked me the same question: what do you want to make? What do you really want to make? Because the thing that I'd written that got me to Hollywood was a European art house movie, intellectual love story about a guy, a writer in his 50s, remembering a love affair in his 20s in the south of France. And it cuts back and forth between France in the 70s and modern day New York as this memory kind of destabilizes everything he thinks he knows about love. And this won the Nickel Fellowship and got me to Hollywood and started my career. And everyone basically said to me in all these meetings, "We love this script. It will never get made. Nobody goes to see these movies anymore. Do you like sci-fi? What do you really want to make?" And I realized, well, I had grown up watching both European art house movies because my dad was a film curator at the Whitney Museum and early on, and then Star Wars and Bruce Lee and James Bond and Doc Savage. And I wanted to combine these movies. I wanted to make European art house movies mixed with genre movies that had the depth and character that I saw in those movies. I always said I wanted to make Claire's Knee in outer space. It's Eric Rohmer film, which makes no sense, but that kind of idea. And so I think at that moment where everybody was asking me, "What do you really want to make?" I suddenly remembered comic books. And I said, "Oh, I want to make a superhero movie, but with the depth and complexity of a European art house film. I wonder if anyone's tried that." And I don't know anything about comic books anymore. It's been too long. So I went to the comic book store, the local comics book store in the Valley, in Northridge, in San Fernando Valley. Golden Apple Comics, great place. And I said, so what's happening in comic books? You have to catch me up. Like, who should I be reading? Who's good? And he gave me Bendis, Brian Michael Bendis, who had just started on Avengers at the very beginning of his Marvel career. I got all of Powers. He gave me Kurt Busiek in Astro City. He gave me Brian K. Vaughan, who is writing Ex Machina and Why the Last Man, or just around the time he started on Lost. There was so much happening with new writers who were like Bendis at the time. Like, what he did with Avengers was, instead of just boom, 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 fight, 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 he had Power Man, Luke Cage, and his wife going on a date and arguing about the babysitter. And then a fight breaks out, and they're in the middle of like a tense marital relationship on a bad date night when they have to go fight bad guys. And I thought, this is brilliant. And I never wrote that movie. I wrote some crazy outlines. Actually, I wrote some deeply extensive outlines that I should probably go back and look at one day. But it got me into comics, and it kind of reinvigorated all these stories. I think the reason that never got made is because video games happened. And in the middle of my trying to build a writing career, Assassin's Creed 2 came out. And it happened at the same time that I had sold a show to the Sci-Fi Channel. And I was writing an original TV pilot about gods. All of the gods from all of the different pantheons are actually like crime families at war with each other, who have immortal and have been building the secret history of the world behind the scenes. And at the same time, I was writing Assassin's Creed 2. And then Assassin's Creed 2 took off and the TV show didn't. But I had all these open doors in the TV world. And I went and said, okay, but my show didn't go, but I have the biggest video game in the world right now. It's made more money than Avatar that came out the same year. And I said, what does this mean for my Hollywood career? And my agent said, nothing. Nobody cared.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
And yeah, I mean, and I think that is different now. And I've gone back and forth to Hollywood a bit more in recent years. But still, my career has been very, very game focused. And it's because that game, Assassin's Creed, just opened up a whole world to me. People would talk to me in the game industry. Suddenly, I was somebody, the very beginning of somebody, but I was able to schmooze and able to meet people and able to go to GDC, and everyone I met, I wasn't a nobody. At least people were willing to talk to me, and that opened up a whole career. So to go back to your original question, what brought me back to video
comics?
Yeah. So what brought me back was, I have been in video games for nearly 20 years now. And it is incredible having the experience of writing something that gets made, of something that millions of people play. But you are always part of a team. You're always part of a large creative team. And it's not as creatively satisfying as the experiences that I had in Hollywood writing things that were my own. And it's satisfying in a different way. It's satisfying in a different way.
Makes sense.
And so I have all of these stories in me that I've been wanting to tell. I have at least a dozen, let's call them IP, a dozen concepts, a dozen worlds that I have developed over the past 30 years that I've been writing. And I was like, comic books are a way to finally just create the things that are taking up all of the most important real estate in my head, and to be able to do it working collaboratively with just a few people and make art, and not just be part of the big, beautiful machine that is video games.
That's beautiful, man. you're that much closer to the actual seat of creation. There's less layers, and you're right there. I'd love to pick your brain. I mean, it's probably early and you probably can't talk about it, but like what the format is. Is it anthology stories, or is it an ongoing universe? But I'm sure that's under wraps still, so I won't ask. I'm just telling you I'm excited to find out.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't announced the first series yet. Going too soon. I'm very close to, by the time this comes out, I probably will have announced who my artist is and may have announced what the series is. But I can tell you it is not an anthology. It is a series. All dozen of them are ongoing series. Some of them limited series, some of them ongoing series, not in connected worlds, but all of them connected by being big, high concept ideas. Big, high concept sci-fi ideas that all are the kind of stories that take how you see the world and twist it.
Why? What drew you to that conceptual hook, that theme, like that strange worlds kind of Asimov-y, paradigm expanding kind of stuff?
I think it's just what my brain generates. It's what it gravitates to. I grew up reading Philip K. Dick, Slaughterhouse-Five, Vonnegut. These were the kind of writers I was attracted to since high school. It comes from my dad as well. My dad is a screenwriter. He wrote Jacob's Ladder and Ghost, and he writes about the big questions, about the nature of existence and life and death and time. And I think it's in the genes. I think in conversation with him for 50 years, I think it translates. Yeah.
You're just being your authentic self. You're being true to who Joshua is, and that's what comes out.
I think, yeah, I mean, that is an incredible gift to be able to do that, right? And you look at all of the great artists, right? They are people who were able to authentically be themselves and write something that they needed to write. Simultaneously with having somebody who believed in them enough to fund them, a Medici, an audience that was interested enough to fund, to create that material for them. And how you find that audience is the fascinating mystery that I'm now involved in. As I kind of look at like all the different ways that I've put story into the world in my life. And I've always aimed big, right? I wanted to be James Cameron or Spielberg when I was a teenager. I wanted to make the biggest movies on the biggest canvas possible. And instead, I got to make video games on the biggest canvas possible, but I wasn't Spielberg, right? I was one of the guys in the corner kind of hammering some of the set together. At least that's how I feel. But I think
some of us who know what you contributed to large worlds like Destiny, obviously I'm a huge Destiny fan. We understand that there's more than just, you did a little more than sit in the corner and tack on a set there. You helped create the world of Destiny. Like, let's not downplay that one.
You're kind. I was a small part. I was a small part of a very big team who are all incredibly talented. But to be Spielberg, you cannot start with the $1 million canvas. And that's the thing that I've learned, that the more money there is, the more compromise there is, the more ego there is. Every creative project with a lot of money has an amazing amount of ego battling that every single participant is involved in. And let's not call it battling. Let's call it navigating. Okay. And that has been a fascinating dance to learn over the last 20 years. But if you take away the money portion, well, you're never going to take away the ego portion. You just have less to deal with. But if you take away the money portion, then you can do things on your own where you get to be the Spielberg or the James Cameron. The smaller the budget, the more the creativity is the thing that's coming genuinely from inside you, the place where Kafka got to write from, the place where Philip K. Dick was writing for a buck as fast as he could. But I don't mean to compare myself to either of them, but the idea of the sole artist being deeply authentic, you need to have no money until that audience comes. And that audience may not come until after you're dead, like Kafka. But it's the aim low, dream big.
Nice.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's circle back to the languages, the discussion that we initially were tackling, but we're going to touch on this some more as we go. I have a very strong feeling.
Okay.
But let's take comics. Let's put comics over there on the shelf for a second, and let's talk about, because a conversation we had before was the languages of writing. You need to use different tools, techniques, obviously, for different media, but there's also different mindsets. There's things that transfer between. So let's kind of work our way through that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with video games.
We should start with just defining what we mean by the languages of writing.
Please, yes, do that.
So you could probably more clearly say something like medium-specific storycraft or narrative code switching. But I like the phrase the languages of writing because it's what I've used for my whole life, and or at least probably since I started in video games and became very aware of learning a new one. And secondly, because the mastering of new skills and techniques is so similar to moving to another country and learning a new language. It involves the same skill set. It involves the same muscle memory of discovering, being overwhelmed, using, becoming proficient at. It's so the languages of writing. And every single medium that I have worked in had their own.
I like it too because it feels writerly. It feels like a writerly phrase. It rolls nicely.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to start with video games and XR, but really, film would be screenwriting would be the beginning. So you hear a lot of people. Oh,
not really. Oh, I mean, for me, it goes before that because I started as a novelist, a failed novelist, but I wanted to be Paul Auster originally. Actually, that was Spielberg originally at 12, Paul Auster in college. And that was really the first language and just to give you like a brief summary, like I started as a fiction writer trying to write novels, then went into journalism and was writing about hip hop and film, and then wrote my first screenplay, ended up in Hollywood, then video games took over, then stumbled into VR and XR, AR, which was a whole new language, and then comics. So that's sort of like all the different places where I've had to start at the bottom of the hill and start again. And that the language of my first language of novelistic writing, I realized like the most important thing that I had to learn that I didn't know until I really started taking myself seriously as a writer in my early 20s, started going to workshops and classes and really writing every day. The first language I had to learn, the first technique in that language I had to learn, the first syntax I had to learn was descriptive prose, describing what you see, and not just what you see. And that was the thing that overwhelmed me, because I remember like sitting down with my notebook and a pen on a street in New York and looking around and being so overwhelmed by reality, so overwhelmed by the hullabaloo of everything coming at me through every sense, and just thinking, there is no way that I can describe this in words. I don't, how would you begin? I would need a film camera and audio, and when I need VR, like I need all these things that I don't have access to at 18, sitting on the street in New York. But no, I just have a pen and paper. So I pushed myself to just do it, just try, and do it again and again and again and again, and practice and practice and practice. And that was like my first 10,000 hours. Gladwell talks about.
Yeah.
That was what I put all of myself into, until I think I got really good at it. And then I went to screenwriting sometime shortly thereafter, jumping over journalism, and started writing my first film, and wrote the most beautiful descriptive screenplay that anyone's ever read. And people were like, you're using the wrong art form. You don't need this here. And I realized, as I eventually started writing screenplays, like the very first tool that I needed to let go of was descriptive prose. It was utterly useless in this world, because that's not your job. That's the director's job, to describe it on celluloid or on digital now. But it is your job. The new language I needed to learn had different syntax, and it included structure, and it included a very visual language that was very specific. It was not just as in a novel where you can describe from the point of view of an ant on the ground up to the cosmos in a single sentence.
Yeah.
In film, you can't do that. You cannot be that broad that you can describe an entire family, the generations of a family in a paragraph. You have to choose your shot. What's the director? What's on the screen? How do you tell this moment of this story? And how do you do it in a grounded, clear way? Because it's a visual language. You're suddenly writing what is never going to be seen. It is only instructions for the creation of a different piece of art, a visual piece of art, visual and audio. There's a really good story I was reminded of today that was part of this. My dad, when he wrote Jacob's Ladder, he wrote it when he was a starving screenwriter raising little kids in the snow in Illinois, in a little college town. But 10 years later, after this whole journey, when he was actually making it with Adrian Lyne, and it was written before he had learned any of the lessons. And he had, at the end of this film, described this climactic scene that had, I think he described it as like the void opens up, and we see millions of angels and demons in battle with each other. And the famous line he tells is that Adrian said to him, "Bruce, how many carpenters will it take to build the void?" Because this was at a time pre-CGI, a good 10 years before CGI became common, which allowed directors to have artists to build anything they could imagine. This was also a film that was being shot in a style that was grounded in 70s, and every effect in that film was practical. So there was that. But then there was the fact that Bruce took away, like, what was for him, Bruce, my dad, his greatest Hollywood lesson, which was write what can be built, not just what you can describe. And you can believe he drummed that into my head. And that became metaphoric for me of like, this is a language about concision and clarity of idea, not about breadth and beauty of construction. So that was my first big kind of overwhelming lesson. There was also the other parts of the language of screenwriting that I had to learn were structure, which was about the fact you have a very, very tight frame to build on. It's 3 acts, 5 acts in TV. It's a set number of pages. It has to be probably around 90, although I usually pushed 120. There's only so many lines of dialogue you can fit on each page. Scenes have to be about 2 minutes long. That's what we're used to. That's our rhythm. It has to move fast. And that was not a skill I'd needed in writing novels at all. That was all new. And then there was this other part of it which was pitching. Pitching your stories was one of the greatest skills that I had to learn, because it was about how to summarize. And summarize is the wrong word, and sell is the wrong word. It's how to translate all of your insanity and characters and images in your head and the chaos, the maelstrom of this idea that is not yet formed, into the core hook that will help people who desperately in these studio offices want you to succeed, to bring them the thing that's going to make them all rich. They are salivating to be hooked, and all they want is bring me the greatest hook that I get it instantly in 1 or 2 lines. Why this movie is going to be unique, amazing, new, and yet exactly like everything I've seen before, and yet with just a touch different. That skill is a crazy hard thing to learn. We all learn to write by learning to tell stories of things that have happened. Pitching is learning to tell stories of things that haven't happened yet, because you haven't written it. You don't know what the story is about yet. And you have to describe a place you haven't been in a way that's going to convince people to let you go explore that place, and hope that the thing you said you were going to find when you got there is actually there.
Wow.
And those, I think, are all skills that carried forward into video games. I had to learn when I got to video games, God, did I have to learn how to write quickly. How to not write quickly, but write scenes and stories that move quickly, that are concise, right? I always remember that at Bungie, over my computer, I had a sign that says, "Brevity is the soul of wit, aka press X to skip."
Everybody needs that sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So A, that translated, and then B, what is the hook? What is the hook of the idea? Because so much of my video game life has not been just the big games I've worked on. There have been tons of independent games, small projects, games I've pitched along the way that I've gotten to build or pitch myself as part of larger games. So that skill of learning to have that clarity and to have that authenticity of your connection to a story, an idea, has been a hugely important skill. A language to keep my jargon.
To keep the metaphor going.
Yes.
The hook, the concept of being able to distill down and share the hook. I've heard that tabletop role-playing game designers, when you're building a new world setting or a rule set, you got to find the hook. When you're talking to somebody who's working in comic books, you got to find the hook. Board game designs, what's the hook? And usually it's mechanical as opposed to lore or world, but that's a theory. That's a tool, a language that's usable everywhere.
Yeah.
In creatives, at least.
Yeah.
I think.
And in game design as well, it's a gameplay hook. What's the loop? What's the mechanic that is new that I've never experienced before? Yeah. So many games start with the mechanic, not the story. And it's because there's something crunchy, something juicy, something you want to play, you want to do over and over. And then you bring in the story to figure out why you do it.
There possibly could be an argument to be made that when you sit down to play a game, you want to play and then maybe get story, as opposed to if I go to a movie or pick up a book, I want story first and then maybe something else later. But a game leads with play and then story makes it better or hooks you or adds more to it. But that's a whole...
I think that's right. I think I would balance that with, though, I think as important to gameplay these days, especially, is not necessarily story, but story world.
Yeah.
Do you want to be in that world? Is that a world that is visually compelling? Is it a place you want to spend time? And so I think that balance of story world with gameplay is the shared hook of a game, that of a successful game.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, but doing world building on games like Destiny and Outriders, I mean, you had to have learned that the world building language. There has to be aspects that are particular to that part of the craft. Is there things you had to learn that were different for world building in video games that was different than building a world for a film or building a novel world? Or
I don't think so.
no, same syntax.
No. It's the same syntax, interestingly. The narrative affordances, to use a game term, that you use to express that world building are different. But the core of world building is always the same. It's imagining a place that doesn't exist into existence and finding a way to make it grounding and grounded and yet unique. The syntax is, in games, you get to paint the world around the gameplay. In a film, TV, novel, comic, in a linear story, your primary responsibility is the journey of that character. And that is going to hook players as much as the world. That is the gameplay, a linear story. In a video game, in an interactive game, that mechanic of the story, of the character story, isn't really your responsibility as a writer. It's the game designer's responsibility. The game designer is taking the player, and I'm separating out, obviously, the fact that often a video game does have a character that you're playing, right? And that character has to, their needs and wants has to be aligned with what the player needs and wants. And that's a whole art to itself. But just to finish this metaphor, the player is the character. The player's journey, which is the soul of a linear, is not the writer's main responsibility in an interactive experience in a video game. The writer's main experience really is the world building and giving emotion to the gameplay, giving drive to the gameplay so that the gameplay is supported and carried within story. Or the story, the gameplay is not there to carry the story. The story is there to carry the gameplay. And so the world building you have is environmental storytelling. It's non-player characters. It's all of the detritus of the world you find through the historical documents. The whole. You have so many pieces of world building that you can go so much deeper in than you can in a novel or a movie, because the player, being the character, can go and explore whatever they want. And so it's not like Blade Runner where he's all this. This is all very obvious, but in Blade Runner, right, you're walking through, you see Harrison Ford, Deckard, walking through this apartment filled with interesting things. And you as a player want to look through all of it, but you as a writer don't have to design any of it, because you're only going to show the player, the audience, the things that are important to drive that story forward. Whereas in a story world, the building of a story world for a game, you get to go deep into what's in all of those drawers and what's in the documents on that computer, and you get to paint the world with a much deeper brush, and that's very exciting.
So you've gone from sitting in New York, taking in the whole universe, trying to find a frame and a focus to put that in, what elements to focus on through 10,000 hours of writing. And then you got even more focused with screenwriting. And then you got to expand a bit when you come into video games. You got more space to play with environmental storytelling, NPCs, backstory, world building. Now, coming into comics, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're suddenly tightening that frame way back down again, and you're focusing on panels, on pages, and...
Absolutely. Yeah. It is it's exactly right. Instead of an expansion, it is a constraining into a specificity of writing that was extremely challenging when I first started writing my first one after 20 years of video games, because video games are the art of the possible in a way. The art of the possible. It is the as obviously constrained by budget, but that's something I've been very lucky to work on big budget games. The art of the possible, meaning especially when you're writing branching story, where you're so much of your storytelling is about, if you do this or this or this or this, there is going to be a world that's going to open up to you for you to move down that road. And so the art is always about balancing choices and creating satisfying alternative realities that all make sense potentially together. To narrow that all down into a single linear story, well, on one hand, it's deeply relieving. As much as I love designing vast, expansive, branching, interactive worlds, God, do I love just telling a story about a character. So A, it's going back to that. But B, it was this discovery that you cannot just write freely, write your story, write your characters, and then figure out where you're going to put your camera. Like, where are you going to break for each panel? You do that and you end up with with every shot you need, it's going to be 5,000 pages. And I think this is the first lesson that every screenwriter who says, I've got a screenplay, make this into a comic, immediately realizes, oh, I don't have a comic script. I have something different. A comic script is, and this is my discovery, if movies were the specificity of what's the camera pointing at, it takes away, well, the camera points at this and then this and then this and then this, then because you're losing movement, you're losing flow. You have to choose not just what your shot is, but what is the exact microsecond of that shot. And the writing happens in kind of a more staccato way than anything I've ever written before, because I'm stopping at every sentence to go, is this the exact right sentence to get this idea across if I only have 5 to 8 frames on this page and 30 words tops or so per panel? Where exactly do I put my camera? Exactly. And what exactly is happening in it? So basically, I'm creating my shot list as I write. So I'm getting to use my film language I learned. I'm getting to use the visual cinematography languages I've learned. But I'm also learning I'm learning how to do what I've seen in comic book pages for years and years, which is the variety of panel usage and the economy on the space to use the page as a canvas, as a piece of art, to dramatically impart the events of this moment, not just show them through the lens, but to use the lens as part of the storytelling. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that. I had an instructor 25, 30 years ago now, actually, 30 years ago now, tell me once, a storyboard is not a comic book and a comic book is not a storyboard. They look the same. They could be similar. They are not the same thing. You're looking for different beats.
Yeah.
So same thing, 30 years later. Did you have to learn, and how are you learning? Like, there is a whole nother language to writing for comic books. There's panel breaks. There's how to time turns. There's panel shapes. There's taking in a whole page or a center spread into consideration for emotional beats and for story beats. Like, it really is a very unique art form. Is it just a matter of sitting down and reading 10,000 comic books, or how?
Well, it helps that I've already read 10,000 comic books, right?
Yeah.
I just never studied them as I read them. I just experienced them. So there is an osmosis, to use that word again, that has happened over the past 40 years. But over the past year, it has been about really sitting down with the comic books I love to study them. Oh, how do they do that? How did they make me feel that? How did they use the page? What shots did they use? Did they choose to tell their story? And God, there's so many great people online, YouTube videos. We have such an amazing community of writers and artists who are freely sharing their ways they work and giving lessons to each other online. It's, of course, because everybody wants attention and is trying to build their influencer audience with meaningful product, but their meaningful product is really meaningful. And what it results in is an entire, let's say, a generation who now has access to all of the greatest teachers of any skill you could want, really. It's all right there in your living room, available at your fingertips. And that is amazing. Like, we're living in an amazing time. So I've watched lots of YouTube videos.
There you go. Well, not to plug an old friend of the show, but Jim Zub has an incredible YouTube channel when it comes to writing for comics.
I definitely started with Jim. That's where I started. Yeah, amazing.
Did you pick up the classics, Bendis's book and McLeod's book and
absolutely
all the ones that are
words and pictures, and pictures, writing for comics, understanding comics. Yeah,
for sure.
There's a great one too, the DC Way. I was really surprised by having not been a DC fan. I am Marvel all the way, 40 years, but the DC Way comic, I forget who it's by, was really useful.
I think I let mine out. Well, not to go down a side tangent, but I'm also Marvel, but Vertigo imprint. There were books in there like House of Secrets and Preacher and
Swamp Thing, Watchmen.
Yeah. Books of Magic. I loved Books of Magic.
Oh, great. Yeah. I by not DC, it's not to knock DC, but I think it happened that there was a core idea behind Marvel that has always been in it that was not in DC. And the Marvel idea was more in line with my original desire to tell genre stories with European art house storytelling. From Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, early on, it was always about real people dealing with impossible genre worlds. And DC didn't have that. And I think more writers have obviously moved in that direction, and I just have not read them over the years.
When we get to the end, I want to hear what you are reading, but we'll save that for when we get to the end there. I guess now that you're learning the language of comics and you can look back, are there things you're learning now or have learned now that you're applying in this new endeavor that you could look back and go, hey, I wish I had known this when I was writing for screen or I was writing for video games? Is there a tool you've picked up in comic books that is applicable that we could hand back to the young narrative designers?
That's such a good question. I don't think I've been in it long enough yet.
Okay. I'll just have to come back.
Come back to me in a year.
All right. I think it's been a year since our first one almost. I think so.
Yeah.
Or longer even.
So I'm a year into writing comics, but I think still new enough, obviously. So come back to me in 10 years.
I want to hear a little bit more about Strangeland Comics. I want to know a little bit more about, because I saw the logo on LinkedIn and it was immediately, it was like, that's my brand. Like that's
nice.
I'm hooked. I'm people who know me know I'm a huge Cthulhu fan, and the tentacles kind of tied to that, and then the sci-fi, the rocket.
So just to describe it, it's a open book with tentacles shooting up out of the pages with a full moon behind it, or at least a abstract sphere with a rocket ship, a 1950s rocket ship. So it's kind of classic sci-fi horror, big genre worlds, but with extremely bright contrasting colors. Bright pink moon, orange background in one of them. with multiple versions of it, with multiple colors. And just to give props, Leonardo Romanelli is this incredible young artist who works in pen first and never goes to pencil. He builds in ink. and his work is beautiful. It all almost looks like a woodcut.
Apart from the logo, the name really grabbed my attention. Where did that come from?
It is grounded in Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, the 1950s, 1960s sci-fi novel, which is about, if you don't know it, everyone knows the phrase Stranger in a Strange Land, but the book is about a kid who is born on Mars. He is the child of colonists who've moved to Mars, and they all die except for him, and he's raised by Martians. And decades later, as an adult, he comes to Earth for the first time. And he is a human who is coming home, but he's the stranger in a strange land, seeing our world through new eyes. And the eyes of a first-timer, with all of our strange customs and weirdness and all of the mythologies that we have all agreed to live by together. That idea has always been key, I think, to everything I've written, that it's always been about wanting to give you, the reader, new lenses to see the world through, and to open your eyes to the hidden worlds all around us. And so that was the key. So the company, the studio is named Strangeland Comics so the studio is named Strangeland Comics because the message I want to give you is with these books, we're going to be playing with your expectations. We're going to be making sure that you use your brain, inviting you to use your brain to see the world anew.
I like that.
Cool.
It's been 20 years since I've read Stranger in a Strange Land, but part of me remembers that it got a little dark. There were some twists along the way. Is that something we can expect from what's going to come out of the comic book company? Is there going to be will there be a darker side, I guess is where I'm going with this. Is there going to be some work that perhaps explores some of the darker sides of humanity?
I think it's going to be, each story is a little different, obviously. We'll be tackling different sides of the genre. So some of them go very psychological horror, very body horror, very elder god horror.
Oh, good.
And some of them are very much adventures. Great Spielbergian, Time Bandits, Tintin, right? Like the great, great adventures that you're going to want to read with your kids. So I think the one thing that, and then there's going to be a lot of a number of them are really kind of going back and forth between the two. Really, I think some of them are both horrifying and awesome, existentially terrifying and funny. And I try always to kind of get a little bit of all the genres in everything that I put out there. It's so funny because thinking about Outriders, which had a lot of me in it, I think that the biggest criticism that game got, the story got, was that it couldn't decide what genre it was.
That's what I liked about it.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
And I think no, that wasn't a bug. That was intentional. That was, thank God, there are people who do like that.
Yeah.
I think there is no question there's always going to be an audience who are like, wait, I thought this was a horror film. Why am I watching a kid? Or wait, I brought my kid to this. Why is this moment existentially terrifying? And I think, or why are you making me laugh in a moment when I'm so scared? I think that I like that juxtaposition of tone.
I think it's those of us who grew up reading heavy metal and
yes,
saw that from one story to another, turn a page and you're going from laughing to, oh my God, what is that? Like
amazing. Yeah. It's almost like, what every story is an emotional anthology.
Yes. There you go. Put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Life is just an emotional anthology. I don't know if that means anything.
We'll workshop it later.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
man. Let's start bringing this. Let's start putting a little bow on top of this. I'm looking back. What are the key things that you're bringing with you? What are the universals? What are the techniques, tools, languages, syntaxes that you picked up along the way on this wonderful, wonderful journey that are now going to carry you into this next chapter?
I think it's an interesting writing for comics is an interesting marriage of two of the most important skills that I've learned from the different mediums. The first one is economy of space, of time. That comes from writing scenes in video games that you don't want players to press X to skip, and from writing incredibly tight structures for Hollywood movies.
Okay.
And secondly, what's really kind of amazing is that it has brought forward the very first language of writing I ever used, which was description. It has brought it back out from the depths of my soul. It has been brought to me as a gift, saying you can use this again. But what's so interesting is that while the comic book page is incredibly tight, the script for the comic book page can be as long as you want. And in fact, it needs to be, because now your audience is one other person. It is the artist. And I get to use all of my powers of description to translate the complex image idea in my head to another person. And that has been a joyful discovery that I'm describing again. And I love writing for just one person, an audience of one. That's delightful, because you can actually talk to them through the comic. You can, through the script, you can actually say, okay, I know you're thinking this, but this is actually more like this, or what you're going to want to draw here is this, but what if instead, or here, I want you to do this thing that you do that I love, and that's so cool. Your script becomes a personal letter. Yeah.
That is really cool.
It's really cool. But that's also like, it's like a screenplay in that it is the thing that no one's ever going to see, right? You are still transmitting your story through another person, through an artist. And it is the collaboration of your imagination and their imagination that makes this piece of art. And that is kind of a really new, thrilling thing that I'm learning in this language, because I've collaborated with hundreds of people, but I've never collaborated so closely with one single person like this. And that dance to create this art together is a new dance to learn.
And it's an enjoyable dance?
So far, it's great. Yeah, I'll tell you how it goes.
10 years from now.
Exactly.
That's fantastic, man. That is so cool. So
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start moving towards the door. I do have a philosophical question that I ask everybody, and I can't remember if I asked you before, and I didn't go back and look it up, so I'm just going to ask you again, and we'll see if you have the same answer if you did answer it before.
Okay.
Cool. So that philosophical question is, in my opinion, there exists this magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also comic books, improv, screenplay, music, all these things where we can all just get together. There's a shared language, there's a fellowship. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
It's so funny because I've spent the past hour talking about all the things that are different about all the different mediums. My initial go-to is to say character, but that is absolutely not a tool that you need in video games, because character is what player does. I think what it comes down to is idea. A new idea, a hooky idea, an idea that hooks you because it is both unique and familiar. It is the thing that is juicy and exciting that people are instantly engaged by. Every single medium needs to maybe not start with, but start for each, not start with as a writer or creator, but for each audience member has to start with that morsel of the idea. You have to infect them with the idea, the hook, the mystery at the core of what you're telling.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Thanks.
All right. Well, this is where I do a quick fire because I just want to get to know you a little bit better and what you're up to. What are you reading these days?
Nexus by Harari. Give me a second. Let me say this. Okay. Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari. Okay.
No, I do not. No.
Oh my God. So he's the writer of Sapiens. So he is an historian, an Israeli historian and philosopher and thinker writing about AI. He is the guy who became the history whisperer to Silicon Valley. He was in there with early ChatGPT and all of the early AI makers because he was writing about the incredible potential of AI when it was new. Now he's written a book about the danger of AI and started with what are information systems and how information systems have changed over the history of our world since the Bible and the printing press. But every story he tells about the Bible and the printing press and the history of our world allows you to see it with a new lens, allows you to understand it completely differently as an information system. And it is a new mythology for the world that he's able to impart again and again and again. And then the second half of the book is taking that all into the future. He's like, here's everything we know about what went wrong and right with the Bible, what went wrong and right with the printing press, with totalitarianism and capitalism. Now imagine all of this with an entirely alien intelligence that we do not understand in control. It's wild. It is so smart. It's so important.
Is it making it harder to sleep at night?
There's enough in the world doing that. It's a piece of it. Yeah.
It's on my list now. That's right up my alley. What are you playing these days? And that could be video game, tabletop role-playing, board game, anything at all.
To be fair, I barely allow myself any time to play because I'm writing video games during the day and comic books at night and weekends and raising a family. So the three games that I've started and enjoying on my PlayStation are the new big open world Star Wars game, the Astrobot game from PlayStation it's just a very fun platformer, and then a puzzle game called Humanity, which is a kind of a art game where you lead vast crowds of humanity through puzzles until eventually you can get them into a beam of light where they float up into heaven. You're a prophet, I suppose. An abstract.
Sounds like a cult, actually.
Yes, it sounds very cult-like. So a puzzle game, a platformer, and a big open world adventure game. That's a good combo.
Okay, we're going to bring the quickfire to an end with a really hard one, and I'm going to twist it a little bit for you. So the question is, if the essence of Joshua was boiled down into the perfect you and then injected into, typically I ask a game world, but we'll say game world, comic world, a different world, A, what would the world be? And then B, what would your stereotype or class or race or however you want to put it, who would Joshua be if you were injected into a fictional world?
Whoa. I think I would be like a 12-year-old boy, which is about where I stopped aging, emotionally and mentally. I think I would be a 12-year-old boy dreaming of being a rogue thief wanderer, nomad, in a time travel adventure in which I was constantly switching from one time to another, out of control, collecting a group of characters from all these different time periods, the guy with the laser gun and the knight and Howard the Duck, and ending up in some oasis world that is the pocket universe at the end of time, where people, time travelers from all over existence, end up.
If that hasn't been made already, that needs to be made into something.
Absolutely. That goes back to the one world I've been building in my head since I was 12 years old that has never made it onto paper.
Yet.
That will be the 13th comic for Strangeland after I finish the first dozen. I'll finally sit down at the age of 75 or 80 and write my 12-year-old fantasy.
That has symmetry to it. I
love it. I love it.
Well, that, my friend, it brings us close to the end. I'm going to push you out into the cold shortly here, but before we do, I do like to open up a little space. Is there anything, obviously, that you've been working on that you'd like to promote and mention? Give me a little bit. Give me the elevator pitch, but also where can we find you online? Where can we follow you? Where do we sign up to get emails? All that good stuff.
Strangelandcomics.com. Go to strangelandcomics.com. It's a very basic website right now, but you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll be the first to know when our first issue is coming out. You will get behind the scenes video as I build the comic, as I build the studio, seeing kind of into the process. If you want to read more about kind of some of the ideas I talked about today about the languages of writing, I wrote an article on Substack at strangelandcomics.substack.com. And I think that's probably enough plugging. I'm excited.
You plug it all.
And I'm working on a fun video game right now. I'm working with another Axiom, the team behind Gorilla Tag, the first $100 million VR game. And I am the story lead, building the whole world around their new game, Orion Drift, which there is a Discord right now where I'm running a very cool, ongoing kind of ARG filled with lore and puzzles, building the world of this game pre-launch with thousands of people who are there working together to kind of solve the puzzles, and building a whole story world with an active community is incredibly fun. And I invite you to come to the Discord for Orion Drift and play the game.
I will be throwing all the links in the show notes so everybody can find and follow that. That's so cool. All right, well, the links will be in the show notes. People will come and follow you. Everybody go sign up for the newsletters.
Beautiful.
That's it. Before we head out, before I push you out the door and start closing down the old tavern here, I want to give you the last word, the parting words of wisdom as you head out the door. Do you have one last little bit of wisdom I can suck out of your brain?
Oh, I thought you were going to give me one. I thought you were offering.
No, I'm asking. No, I'm not the one here with the knowledge. That's you.
How about this? Narrative in games is important because it gives the gameplay meaning. Play is what you do, and story is why you do it.
I'm afraid it's once again time for me to close up shop. The Goblin Karaoke party last night did some pretty serious structural damage, and the artificers should be here soon to do some repair work. But before I push you out the door, I want to first say thank you once again to Joshua Rubin for sharing your expertise and wisdom on the diverse languages of writing. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until next time, keep creating, exploring, and sharing those worlds and stories. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.